I'd like to start by talking about something that happens to every Christian if you are a Christian for long enough, which doesn't have to be too long in some cases, and that's getting into an argument or a disagreement with somebody, even a fellow believer. I'd say especially with a fellow believer. As we've been looking through the book of Job, much of the book is an argument. It's an ongoing argument between four people. But when you find yourself in these arguments, how do you typically handle it? Do you act differently than, say, a non-Christian would in an argument? Or are you just as vicious as other people are also? Consider this situation. Let's say there's a man who's arguing with his wife, and it's going on, and they're both digging in their heels. They're getting frustrated, and he knows he shouldn't say it, but he says to her, "I don't know how you can be so pretty yet so stupid at the same time." And she says, "You want to know how I can be pretty and stupid?" She says, "The Lord made me pretty so you'd be attracted to me, and he made me stupid so I'd be attracted to you." Name calling and saying hurtful things like that. Not the Christian way, of course. The more I see Christians acting in this way, saying things they ought not to say, to be completely honest, I really can't blame people for not wanting to go to church and not wanting to be around those people, because they think, if that's the kind of person that goes there, I don't want any part of it. We know we always need to strive to be better, because it's not just us that it's a reflection of. It's a reflection of our church and our Lord and all those things. This morning we're going to move to the next chapter in Job, and after chapter 2, way back when we were going through that chapter, we are made aware of four people in this drama from that point forward, and it's Job and Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So four people, but this morning we'll find out all along there was a mysterious fifth person there who was witnessing this, and his name is Elihu. We shouldn't expect it to be an ordinary name. The other names are not modern names either. There's a lot we can say about Elihu. But I just want to preface it briefly by saying a couple things are helpful to know about him. One thing, he is significantly younger than the other four. So out of respect, he allows them to talk first, have their say, and then he joins in. The other thing to know, Elihu is a talker. He talks and talks and talks. He talks in chapter 32. He talks all of chapter 33, 34, 35, 36, and chapter 37, if that weren't enough. He talks for 6 chapters straight. I know that the original chapters weren't in the writings, but there's a lot of talking that he does. Doesn't mean he's a bad guy by any means. I just think of it like if you've ever been in a group discussion or argument or conversation with several people at the same time, it might be one of these deals where once you finally get a word in edgewise, you get a chance to talk, you want to say everything you want to say because you don't know if you're going to get another chance. So that's sort of how I see Elihu, and rather than read 6 chapters of him going on and on and on more, we're just going to read the first 14 verses of what the Bible says, starting in chapter 32, I should say. So beginning in Job 32, verse 1. So these 3 men ceased answering Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. Then the wrath of Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, of the family of Ram, was aroused against Job. His wrath was aroused because he justified himself rather than God. Also, against his 3 friends, his wrath was aroused because they had found no answer and yet had condemned Job. Now, because they were years older than he, Elihu had waited to speak to Job. When Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of these 3 men, his wrath was aroused. So Elihu, the son of Barachel the Buzite, answered and said, I am young in years, and you are very old. Therefore I was afraid and dared not declare my opinion to you. I said, age should speak, and multitude of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty gives him understanding. Great men are not always wise, nor do the aged always understand justice. Therefore I say, listen to me, I also will declare my opinion. Indeed, I waited for your words, I listened to your reasonings, while you searched out what to say. I paid close attention to you, and surely not one of you convinced Job or answered his words, lest you say, we have found wisdom. God will vanquish him, not man. Now he has not directed his words against me, so I will not answer him with your words. May the Lord's blessing be added to the reading and hearing of his holy word. I think I might have mentioned this somewhere along the way in this series, but for me, one of the biggest challenges in interpreting the book of Job is determining what the characters actually mean by their words, because we don't have the tone of voice, we don't have facial expressions, nonverbal communication, and nonverbal clues, so we lack all that. So all that we have are the words. And I think it's a bigger hurdle when you look at this man, Elihu, because of all of the research I've done to get opinions of people much smarter than I am. I found scholars who really run the gamut in their interpretation of him and what his intent is. Some say Elihu, very honorable man. Some go so far as to say he is an Old Testament version of Jesus, the way that he brings a conclusion to this. Then there are others on the other side of the spectrum, and they say very much the opposite. He is just your typical immature, arrogant youth who needs to be put in his place. When I read these, it's hard for all of these opinions to mesh together. Somebody has to be wrong, and maybe somebody is right. I'll tell you, when I first read this, to me, I thought Elihu was the young hotshot kid trying to school his elders, say, I'm so much smarter than you, that kind of thing. But after some research, I've softened my stance a bit. Having said that, I'm not going so far to this side to say that he is the Old Testament version of Jesus. I'm not quite sure he's that honorable, but maybe. Again, I'm not going to bring judgment one way or another. For instance, just to show you what I mean, I would suggest doing what I did when I read this chapter. Before I read the chapter, I got in my mind, I'm reading the words of some, again, like I said, hotshot young kid. Maybe everything I despise out of this young millennial generation is coming out of this guy named Elihu. And I read his words and I thought, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I could see someone saying the things he said. So then what I did, I tried to erase my memory of that, and then I looked at it through the lens of someone who was genuinely concerned for a friend and wanted to bring some sort of closure to this agreement. And I reread it looking at those through those lens, and I thought, yeah, I think that's also what he was trying to do. So I can certainly see it both ways, that's for sure. Therefore, like I said, I can interpret it both ways. For this morning, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt, but what I'm going to share with you this morning really doesn't matter what the truth is with Elihu, what his intent was. So take that for what it is also. When you go through and you read these 6 chapters on end where he's talking, there are times when he provides some insightful commentary. but at other times, he then goes and he reiterates some of the same misunderstandings about God that we heard from Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So that's where I think we have a mix of what's going on. He might be a little better than the other guys, but not completely on the right path. To show you what I mean, one thing he should be commended for in these chapters, and it's not in these first 14 verses, but he should be commended for encouraging Job to re-examine his relationship with God. He does that in there, and that's always a good thing for any Christian to do. Never rest comfortable with your relationship with God, because we can always do more, we can always get closer to him and so forth. And that's basically what Elihu suggests that he does. On the other hand, if you would go up a couple chapters to chapter 34, he says about God, he repays everyone for what they have done. Sounds a lot like Job's first three friends here. He brings on them what their conduct deserves. And I read that and I think, really? Not from my experience anyway. That's not the way that the world works, because we see evil people out there prosper. And so Elihu is parroting that incorrect discussion about God. But at this point, Elihu, he joins the argument, and he hints around that, and I should say there are hints in here when you read it, that Job even might be attempting to get a word in edgewise at one part, but Elihu stops him. Like I said, he's a talker, and he got his chance to speak, and he's going to take advantage of it. In that part, Elihu says, pay attention, Job, and listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. And he says this in the middle of what he's saying, so maybe Job is trying to get a word in edgewise there. But as I read that part, it got me to thinking, how should we as Christians handle arguments and disputes and disagreements and so forth, especially with other Christians? Because despite the issues and the problems that his other friends have, they still believe in God. So they, as far as we can tell, are the Old Testament version of Christians. And when I talk about disagreements, of course, I'm not talking about disagreeing what we should have for dinner. You want liver and I want chicken. I'm talking about serious stuff here, like even more serious than in the church. Some people think, well, we should change the color of the carpet in the pews. And no, I like it the way it is. I'm talking about even much more serious issues of spiritual significance and even moral significance. So what I did, I compiled just a few practical suggestions regarding conflict resolution. You don't have to even be a Christian to be on hand with all of these, but you'll see definitely in the very first one is a very Christian approach. And just starting with the first one, always approach the situation and the person with love. Closely related to that, pray for the person. If you have a disagreement, if you really think you're right and you really think they're wrong, pray that God will convict that person. I think oftentimes we take prayer for granted. But when we pray, everyone wins, actually. It's possible when you pray that God will hear that prayer and intervene in the life of the person and convict that person. So that would certainly be a benefit of praying. You ask for something from God and he grants it. But whether that happens or not, you also always benefit from praying for other people, because it changes your mindset. You cease to think of this person as an adversary, and you start putting the focus on the person as a fellow child of God, that we are united in our belief in God. We just have some other ancillary issues that we are trying to work out. So again, at the very least, you're going to benefit in that way by praying. And believe me, sometimes it's easier said than done to pray for another child of the faith, because even in the church, some people just make it hard to be lovable. Just is what it is. Maybe they're having a bad day, having a bad year. I don't know what it is. But when you approach the person in love, it proves, for one thing, you're not avoiding them and you're not avoiding the situation, which is very good, because we know the enemy doesn't want us to talk about the issues, the real important issues with people. He wants us to just all get along. We don't want to ruffle feathers. Just let them do what they're doing and we'll do what we're doing. And he tells us we're going to get along, but we never do. Again, if you don't talk about the issues, it's just going to snowball from there. And if you don't ruffle feathers, it's going to allow the enemy spirit to flourish in that relationship, and that's exactly what he wants. In situations like that, you tell someone you have to talk about this, they might respond something like, oh, well, what, you want me to start a fight with somebody in church? Again, when people say this, to me, that's like lobbing up a softball and hitting it out of the park. That's an easy one to combat because, again, nobody said you're supposed to start a fight. In a way, the fight's already started. So really, you're trying to finish it. And that really leads to the next suggestion, which is very important, by the way. Always stay on the subject, whatever it is. You see, people don't like to be challenged. They don't like to be criticized. I don't like it, but sometimes I know it has to happen. So oftentimes, they will try to divert the issue from what it should be to something that is so irrelevant. And when that happens, don't fall for it. Again, if you stay focused on the issue, you'll know whenever they are trying to move the goalpost or whatever, as they say. Personal example of this, not a church example, but in my day job, we recently had a dispute with a lawyer, believe it or not. I know, hard to believe that lawyers would be difficult to get along with, but we found one that was. And in some discussions, I really wasn't involved directly in the discussions, but it was clear that this person was avoiding the issues and bringing up all these other irrelevant points. And it took a person to stand up and say, that's all well and good, but that's besides the point. That's not what we're talking about here. So it happens all the time, and we just need to beware whenever how people are going to react, because you can pretty much know when how someone's going to react. Oftentimes they get defensive. Again, they don't like to be challenged. Sometimes, and even in the church, they might get angry. It happens. You know, we are made with all of these emotions, and being angry in itself is not a sin. It's how you use that anger. But resorting to anger can lead to the next point, which is don't be coaxed into anger. I've been in my share of disagreements in my life. I'm sure you all have too. And there are times, especially before I was a Christian, but even afterwards, sometimes you just get fed up and you're not making any progress. And there have been times I just want to say, why are you being so stupid and thick-headed? You know, why aren't you seeing it my way? It happens. And I'm not saying I've always been right when I've thought those things, but more so recently, since I've been saved and really trying to make an effort to live a better Christian life, I've been able to control myself better just by taking a step back, taking a couple deep breaths, calm down, those kind of things that they teach you, but it's so hard to remember in the heat of the moment. And I go back to number one, love. Approach them with love. I might be angry with them, but at the end of the day, I still love them and want the best for them. And that's always, as I said, the best approach is to approach them with love. And the words that sometimes I want to say, I realize just keep them inside. It's best not to say them because they may not be loving and they may not be constructive. So I'm sure it's always been better to say less than to say something that we later regret. As we make our way through the book of Job, though, Job does get worn down by the constant accusations of his first three friends. And in response, he tries so hard to assert his innocence. He said he gives a good report, of all these good things that he's been doing, and we looked at some of those. And it's okay to do that if it's all true, and we assume it is in the case of Job, but sometimes you run the risk, and it's debated if Job went over the line or not, acting in a self-righteous manner. I'm better because I've done these things. And so that's something that after being coaxed into anger, we also don't want to be self-righteous either whenever we are defending ourselves. That's just a few pointers. It's just a primer, really. I hope it reminds you of some things, maybe some things you'll keep in the back of your mind when you're in those situations with other people. And again, love and humility, always the preferred tack to take in these kind of situations. Now, look at Job for a minute too. For the sake of argument, like I said, I'm not passing judgment one way or another on Elihu, but even if Elihu was not right in much of what he said to Job, God actually took care of it. You will not find a direct retort from Job towards Elihu, because spoiler alert, next week we're going to jump ahead and we're going to see the very next person to talk is God here. And sometimes God works it out like that for us, where God takes it takes it for us. Not all that often, but I love it when he does it. I'll say that for sure. One last suggestion, though, when you're in these difficult situations, do your best to turn it into something positive. And the immediate question, well, how do I do that? You make it sound so easy. Yeah, I know it's not always easy. Well, for one thing, if you can completely reconcile with the other person, well, that's the easy positive out of it. Sometimes in the real world, it doesn't happen that way. Maybe the fact is that this person is not truly a Christian. That's possible. Maybe they are a Christian, but maybe they're just a little immature in the faith. They haven't matured to that point yet. So they're not quite acting the way that they ought to, but regardless, take this bad experience with a person when they might not have shown the right amount of love and respect to you that they should have. Turn around and show love and show respect to someone else. So often, someone treats us badly, we want to turn around and treat somebody else badly to somehow make ourselves feel better. And I don't know about you, I never feel better when I've done that in the past. But people perpetuate cycles of bad behavior, but we each individually have the ability to stop the cycle by being the bigger person and not treating somebody in ways that we wouldn't want to be treated. I don't know if we realize what kind of an effect we might ever have on other people just by the way that we react to situations. There are Christians out there who add fuel to the fire. They add fuel to the fire to those who say that Christians and people who go to church are just hypocrites and they say one thing and they do another and all that. Well, we each have a duty to show the world what a true Christian believer is. And if you're ever in these disagreements like Job was with a person who's not acting as Christian as they ought to, well, even if you can't change their attitude and change their beliefs, maybe down the road God will show his humorous side in it, and maybe he'll change it a different way. There's been times when I've seen Christians being basically taken to school, as they say, by non-believers when they see a Christian acting a way, and they'll come out and they'll say, well, you sure aren't acting like a Christian, are you? Hopefully, if that happens to a person, the light bulb would go off, oh, I've crossed the line, I need to watch what I'm doing, and so forth. Maybe that's sort of God's humorous way of saying, well, you didn't listen to me earlier, so I'm going to use somebody else who's not even associated with me to get you to shape up. So like I said, whether Elihu, right or wrong in his assessment, really besides the point for what I'm talking about this morning. The importance, though, is addressing the specific issues. And just think that 4,000 years ago, more or less, we had this group of believers involved in a big disagreement. It was a big argument, and since there's going to be no end to disputes and so forth until Jesus comes back, we're just going to have to learn to deal with these uncomfortable situations, even if they are with fellow believers. I think it would be easier on us if we remember some of these practical suggestions. Like I said, there's plenty more that I didn't want to take the time this morning to mention, but there are things that you can call on whenever you find yourself in a sticky situation. And who knows, the next time that you're in a disagreement with another believer, we just always have to be ready to respond appropriately. See, we have more at stake than your typical atheist does, because if a non-believer goes off on someone and curses them up and down and all that kind of stuff, nobody really thinks anything of it. They're allowed to do that because there's no bar set for them. But if a Christian treats someone in an unfair way, well, the reputation of Jesus Christ is at stake, and we ought to represent him in a better way. It's one of many reasons why I think it's a good thing to periodically go to the table of the Lord like we're going to shortly. It's not so much a reminder of who we are, but whose we are, and that is Jesus. By proclaiming the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, we are proclaiming that we are new creations in him. We don't do the same things that we did before. We act differently than other people, and therefore we ought to deal with difficulties differently than other people do as well. Just remembering whose we are is a reminder of the death and resurrection of Jesus, and it leads to our responsibility to be accountable and to hold other believers accountable as well, and all the while giving honor to God. So after I close us in prayer, we will have an opportunity to partake in this ordinance.